Okay, well, let me introduce Jennifer too.
Thanks so much for having me. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Cool. So a little bit about me. My name is Jennifer Tu. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a fellow working for AFSC in Oakland. I'm part of the California Healing Justice Program of AFSC. You might have heard of the co-directors, John Lindsay Pullen and Fatima Khan. My fellowship work includes police demilitarization and prison abolition, all in the state of California. As part of that, I've been doing research and advocacy around AB 481, which, as Art mentioned, is this new California law for transparency and accountability in police militarization. AFSC has been very closely following AB 481 since before the bill was passed. And part of that work included doing some California Public Records Act research into what the state of police militarization is today. After the law went into effect, we have been supporting activists and elected officials across California with policy analysis in dozens of jurisdictions. And so today what I want to do is give you both a little bit of an overview of what this law is, what it covers, and also how it applies directly in San Francisco. So just some basics about the law. This law was signed into law by Governor Newsom last year in September, and it applies to every police department, every sheriff department in the state. It also applies to some other state-based agencies, but I won't get into that today. And it applies to a pretty broad range of military equipment, and it doesn't matter how it was acquired. So you could have straight up bought it, you could have gotten a grant, it could have been a gift, it could have been a transfer. It doesn't matter how it was acquired. The fact that it is there means that it falls under this law. And it also requires transparency and use policies. A use policy is how do you intend to use this equipment, and also when is this equipment authorized to be used? And these policies need to have been proposed and published by May 1st of this year. So SFPD has proposed and published on their website their policy. SF County Sheriff has not. And so that means that SF County Sheriff, all of their use of all of the equipment I'm about to share with you is not compliant with California law. Once the use policy has been submitted, then we're in the place that SFPD is right now, where they have 180 days, about 6 months, to continue to use their equipment, while either the City Council or, for San Francisco, the Board of Supervisors consider the policy and whether there needs to be any adjustments before approving it as an ordinance. After the approval of the policy, an annual report is required for as long as the military equipment is in use starting next year. And just to give you a heads up, I'm going to get into a lot of detail. I'll probably answer your questions in the next slide, but feel free to jump in if you have questions that I need to stop and check in on. So one thing I want to preface with is it can feel very conceptual to talk about military equipment and policies. It gets kind of dry. So I want to open with taking a moment to talk about how military gear gets applied in our cities and why this is important to all of us, no matter what we think of it, and no matter, if we live in cities, if we live in counties, this applies to us all. The Center for Policing Equity looked at uses of force in San Diego County, and they found that Black people there were subjected to force 4 times as often as white people. And then if you go from the county into the city of San Diego, that goes up to 4.6 times as often. So what we find is that when military equipment is present, existing racial disparities get multiplied. And that means that when police forces have more military gear, that gear gets used, and it gets used disproportionately on our neighbors and our communities of color. Later, I'm going to share a few stories, one from San Francisco and around the Bay, And I hope you will think about how racial disparities were multiplied in those situations. This difference is something that the authors of the law also noted, and I'm just going to read exactly what they wrote into the law. Military equipment is more frequently deployed in low-income Black and Brown communities, meaning the risks and impacts of police militarization are experienced most acutely in marginalized communities. And so this is straight from the law and put in by the authors of the law. So with that preface aside, I'm going to dive into the military equipment that's covered by AB 481. It's a lot of gear. It's not everything on this page. There's going to be like there's going to be a number of more slides, and I'm even going to skip some of the equipment that is covered by the law. Some of in terms of where this comes from, where this equipment comes from, some of it comes from the Department of Defense Transfer Program, which you might hear as 1033. But what we found in our research is within California, most of the equipment is just outright purchased. Some agencies even have equipment that they acquired from the 1033 program, and it's just kicking around the storage locker, or they don't use it, they don't find it useful. They went and bought their own versions of the same equipment. So I'm going to cover the most common bits of equipment, including ones that are present and used by San Francisco police, and talk about some of the problems. So on this slide, there's kind of two categories. One is what I'll refer to as assault weapons. So these can be machine guns, submachine guns. San Francisco doesn't have those. Sniper rifles, they do have those, and assault weapons, or sometimes you'll hear them called patrol rifles. I personally feel like patrol rifles sort of makes it sound a little bit more benign than it is. A patrol rifle is it's an assault rifle. It's the kind of class of weapon that we see used in mass shootings. The bullets are larger, they're bigger, they're faster, they're designed to create much greater damage to a human body than a standard handgun. People are much more likely to die after being shot by one of these. In San Francisco, we know that police have these assault rifles, which they probably call patrol rifles, but they're not included in the policy, which means that they're not subject to the accountability or transparency that the rest of the weapons are. And the reason for that is the law makes an exception for if something is standard issue, you don't have to include it. And so San Francisco is one of a small handful of agencies that have decided that their patrol rifles are standard issue. This doesn't make sense to me because when I go around San Francisco, I don't see foot patrol or bicycle cops or motorcycle cops with an assault rifle with them, which means that they're not exactly standard issue. I see them carrying handguns and other things that are standard. And so I would argue that those are standard issue, but not if you've got a weapon that is only issued to some, but not all, it is not standard issue. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that the San Francisco policy doesn't include the assault rifle, but you have the opportunity to advocate with the Board of Supervisors and tell them why it needs to be included and why additional scrutiny is needed for this situation. And just to give you a sense of scale, we looked at about 150 equipment inventories looking for whether they included assault rifles, and 90% of those disclosed their assault rifles. The other bit of equipment I want to cover is what police will often refer to as a MRAP. So that's a mine-resistant ambush protected vehicle, but they just say MRAP, not MRAP vehicle. And one of the most common models of this is something called a Bearcat. It looks a little bit like a tank. Technically it's not a tank. Technically it's an armored vehicle, but many people perceive it as a tank. And when we look at things like Bearcats or MRAPs, we usually think about these in terms of SWAT raids. But I want to share one story of how it was used in a way that harmed community. I live in Alameda County, and the sheriff there about 2 years ago decided to evict a group of single Black moms who were living in a house together. And so they had a pre-dawn raid in which they brought their, which you can see the photo of, in which they brought their Bearcat, their assault rifles. It's dark. This was a group of single Black moms, so they have kids too. And so as you look at military equipment like the Bearcat, like the MRAP, I want to encourage you to ask yourself, who is getting swatted here? Are there kids there? Is there really no better alternative available? Was there really no alternative other than having to evict these moms? If there's a warrant, is there any way that it could be served in a way that's less damaging? Like if someone leaves the house, could it be served on someone's on the way to work? Who does it serve for this military equipment to be deployed? So SF does have armored vehicles, but their policy basically has no limits on authorized use. And I would encourage you to advocate for, if SFPD really must have this tank-like vehicle, then adopt some guidelines that say when the Bearcat should be deployed and when it shouldn't be. Should it be excluded for when people gather for First Amendment assembly? Should it be excluded for routine patrol operations? What about public relations, where they're showing kids the stuff that they do? Should it be normalized to kids in that way? You know what? I'm going to keep going because I am going to spend way too much time on this. All right, this next slide is going to be equipment that you usually might encounter in First Amendment assembly or protest situations. This first item that you see is an LRAD. It's a long-range acoustic device. Kind of the same way you can think of a flashlight is a beam of light compared to a light bulb that shines light. The LRAD is going.
We can't see the LRAD. Can you click on the button so that it's only the speaker showing?
Only the speaker showing.
See how the blue button is? Okay, never mind. Perfect. You did it.
All right, thanks so much.
Okay, great.
Cool. Thanks for stopping me. Okay,
Yeah.
so think about light bulb or a lamp versus a flashlight. That's how you can think of as an LRAD. Like a loudspeaker would be like a lot of ambient noise. An LRAD is like a flashlight that aims sound in a direction. You can think of it almost like some people call it a sound cannon. And the word sound cannon isn't hyperbole because the LRAD gets used as a sonic weapon. And there have been lawsuits that have been won because people experience permanent hearing loss and other ear-related disabilities because of how police used the LRADs against them. There's a couple of doctor-led organizations like the Academy of Doctors of Audiology and the Physicians for Human Rights that have basically said the LRAD needs to be just flat out banned. In San Francisco does have LRADs, and they do say that the LRAD should not be deployed within 50 feet. But the Academy of Doctors of Audiology says that an LRAD that's used at its full volume would put anyone within 100 feet at risk of immediate and permanent acoustic damage. So that's the LRAD. Definitely encourage you to advocate for changing the use policy so that it would prohibit any use that could lead to permanent hearing loss on community members. All right, next, two different kinds of chemical weapons. One is flashbangs. Sometimes you'll hear them called by other names, but flashbang I feel like is the one that is most common. They make a really bright, loud noise, and they also make a really bright light, they make a loud noise. They're kind of a little bit like one of those firecrackers, except that it gets deployed inside of houses. Super problematic because there have been children who've been horrifically disfigured, even killed, in addition to adults who have been maimed, burned, and killed as well. And these are very indiscriminate objects, where it doesn't matter whether who you are, what you've done. It's a really horrific way to be harmed. Tear gas, you'll see that often in crowd control situations, but not as much this year. And the reason for that is there is a different state law, which is confusingly called AB 48, not to be confused with 41, but 48. And it was also signed into law in September. And AB 48 says that when you have a crowd control situation, police can't use chemical agents like tear gas or kinetic energy weapons. So that's rubber bullets or any of the other so-called less lethal weapons. You might hear pepper balls or beanbag rounds. And so they can't use it for crowd control unless there's an objectively reasonable defense against threat to life or serious bodily injury. Even when that is the situation, the law also doesn't permit firing it at heads or at any of the other most vulnerable parts of the human body. SFPD's crowd control policy is about 28 years old, and their use of force policy was updated in January of 2022, but neither of these policies add any of the prohibitions of AB 48. And the use of force policy actively authorizes the use of chemical agents to subdue an unarmed attacker or to overcome active resistance. And so this is directly out of compliance with AB 48. So that's definitely something that you'll want to be bringing up. And let's see. Sorry, lost my slide. There we go. The other category of weapons that you'll see that is most common in this situation is what are sometimes called impact munitions, or sometimes they're referred to as SIMs. Sometimes they're called less lethals, which is kind of a misnomer since they can be very lethal and can lead to death. And you might also hear them called rubber bullets, beanbag rounds, 40 millimeters, or pepper balls. If you're curious about about the lethality of them, Physicians for Human Rights just put out this report called "Lethal in Disguise" about this class of weapons. So same thing as the tear gas. This falls under AB 48, which limits use in crowd control situations. And again, San Francisco, there's no limits for crowd control. It also has some other limits that aren't present that I find pretty disturbing. For example, there's no limit on use if someone is experiencing a mental health crisis, or if someone is about to practice self-harm or is actively suicidal. It doesn't make any sense to have that as an authorized use for self-destructive behavior. So that's one thing I want to flag. The other thing I want to point out is SFPD has this really disturbing dichotomy where they say that in their proposed policy, they say potential alternatives to using the less lethal, the beanbag shotgun. The alternative is the use of a department-issued firearm. And this statement is very similar, struck me as very similar to something that the Berkeley police chief said right at the end, and led to his resignation in 2020 when he was called before city council because of the shows of force, the excessive uses of force from his department during the George Floyd protests. And he said, well, I guess we could shoot them instead. the alternative to shooting someone with a rubber bullet should not be to shoot them with a more deadly weapon. And I want to share two stories about how this weapon in particular has been used in the past year in the Bay Area. So the first is going to be across the bay from you in Berkeley. In this situation, and that's the picture with the building and the bike rack. That's a Walgreens, and a 51-year-old unhoused Black man who was known to be diagnosed with a mental health issue. He went to this Walgreens and he tried to purchase about $14 worth of food from the store. He didn't have enough money, so he gave what he could, and then this resulted in a disagreement that, combined with him pulling a chain from his bag, led to calling the police. The person who called reported this issue specifically as a mental health issue. The man who had come in and didn't have enough money for the $14 worth of food, he ended up getting shot by police with both less lethal and lethal ammunition. If you look up the details, I will warn you that the details are very disturbing, and I'm not going to get into them. Some things to know about it are when the police arrived, 10 minutes was what elapsed between when the first officer reported seeing the man and when the less lethal was reported to have been used. 10 minutes. 3 seconds is what elapsed between beginning the order to drop the chain and then shooting the man with both less lethal and live ammunition. So this was in Berkeley. The other case I want to talk about, many of you might already be familiar with since it happened in San Francisco. On May 19th, SFPD was called because 2 unhoused men were fighting on the ground and one of them had a knife. When SFPD arrived, they first used a 40mm less lethal launcher to shoot both of the men. Shooting the men with the less lethal launcher did not result in de-escalating the situation, so the police went to live fire. SFPD fired from multiple firearms, including an assault rifle, which resulted in both men's deaths. Reading policies and thinking about them and engaging with the board of supervisors on them, like I said earlier, it can be dry and boring, but I want to encourage you to do it anyway, because these policies could mean the difference between life and death in San Francisco. All right, 2 last pieces of military gear I want to cover. And again, this is not everything that's covered by AB 481, just the most commonly used ones. Drones and robots. Robots are they're billed as this helpful tool to increase safety and to possibly de-escalate. There's a Oakland cop who really loves telling a story about how he used his robot to deliver a pizza, and that diffused a standoff and led to a very peaceful outcome. It can also be a really safe way to open a door or to blow up a door without a cop having to walk up to that door, or using a Bearcat to drive through the door. And so these are the situations that police like to talk about. Recently, Dallas police used their robot not to deliver a pizza. They used it to deliver a bomb, and did that because they wanted to deliver a bomb to a sniper in a parking garage to take out that sniper. And so as you think about robots, think about, should police be allowed to remote control lethal options? San Francisco has no authorized use specified for the robot. So that means, is it okay to push or pull someone with the robot? That's up to the police. Is it okay to use any of the attachments? Like if there's an attachment to open a door, to break automobile glass, to blow their way through a door, could this be used to on a person? So those are some questions that I hope you'll ask of the supervisors about the robots. Drones, drones have the same issue of potential for lethality, though we haven't yet seen any any policies that suggest that might be something that police are trying to explore. The biggest thing that we're looking at is drones and the Fourth Amendment, the right to privacy. One thing that San Francisco supervisors are grappling with right now is whether police can access people's ring cams. So the little video camera that some people use for their doorbell, if all of those if access to all of those can be given to police. If this is something you're interested in, the Public Safety Committee is the committee that's currently grappling with this question. For drones in particular, one question I hope you will ask is, sometimes drones are deployed with a warrant and sometimes they are not. And at what point does using a drone without a warrant become surveillance? At what point might it become surveillance that's disproportionately targeted at different people?
Jennifer, what was that image on the bottom left?
Bottom left. Oh, that is a drone that has a attachment for breaking a window. Not all drones have this. It's a special drone or drone attachment, but they do exist.
Thank you.
I did too.
I couldn't tell what it was.
I did too, yeah.
Yeah. When we talk about drones or robots, to me they sometimes feel a little bit more sci-fi rather than real, a little bit more theoretical and hard to think about. And so I want to give you a tool for how to think about not just the drones or the robots, but about all military equipment, and to think about them as the tip of a fiscal iceberg. So the cost of a drone, these can be expensive. They can run to tens, even $100,000. They can also be very cheap. It's very popular to have a donation of a drone, in which case the police are able to say this doesn't cost the taxpayer a dime. This isn't true, because the drone itself is not where the cost is. Whatever the military equipment is, that's not where the cost is. The cost is in the personnel. If you look at just the training part, so not personnel in general, but just the training part of personnel, then you start seeing that picture unfold. There's a cost of initial training, but don't worry too much about that, because that's not where the story lies. The story lies in the cost of that recurring training. How many officer hours are spent per month to be able to use the drone? In Oakland, there are 10 officers who are drone operators, and they spend 40 hours a month just on training to stay in training for operating the drone. So that means 400 officer hours a month, that's going to be about 2.5 people worth of time, is devoted just to the training part of being able to deploy drones. And then you can start expanding out. What is the cost of investing in police? Keep in mind that in some places, police are paid double, even quadruple what other city workers are making. So how many teachers weren't funded? What kind of library support services and staff could have been funded? What kind of youth employment opportunities weren't funded because of this investment into the police? That's still a number that you can calculate. The number that you can't calculate, that's even greater than that, is the cost of the harm from over-policing. When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When police have these so-called less lethal weapons, they use them. When police have assault rifles and tank-like vehicles, they use them. When police have tear gas, they use them. When police have dogs or fire hoses, they use them. And so think about that cost of over policing. The kid whose family just got swatted last night and goes to school and fails a test and grades plummet. The friend that you have in your neighborhood who had an encounter now has physical and emotional trauma and needs extra care. The neighbor who's now gone forever because of over policing. And as you think about this, think about it not as just a single iceberg of the drones. Think about it as the cost of all military weapons. The tip that you see is the initial cost of that military weapon, that $5,000 price tag on the drone, the $500,000 price tag on the Bearcat. But keep looking. Look at the personnel, look at the training, not just initial training, but the ongoing training, and ask yourself, how much are we diverting away from our communities? How does this improve our cities? How much does over-policing cost, and how we as a city are able to nurture our kids, to care for those in need, to provide the services that makes our city a beautiful place to be? All right, I'm going to take us back to the law and specifically what you can do in San Francisco. So use policies must have been proposed and published by May 1st of 2022. SF County Sheriff is in violation because they haven't done this. All of their continued use of the equipment that they have is out of compliance with the law. This is something that you can raise with your supervisor. This is something that you can that you can call out as something that should not be happening. We keep moving. Use policy elements. It's easy to say there has to be a use policy, and it's easy for police agencies to say, we wrote something down, that's our use policy. So the lawmakers anticipated this confusion and laid out 7 elements, which I've kind of rearranged, that describe what has to go into a use policy in order for it to be considered a use policy. So for example, you have to be able to say what the equipment is, what that military gear is, and you have to say how many you have, what the initial cost is, and the lifespan. You also have to be able to describe it. And you also have to have some categories of regulation defined. You need to define authorized use, training, and any legal or procedural rules for use. There's aspects of accountability and transparency as well. There's a couple of common shortcomings in use policies that we've seen across California agencies, and these go back to those to that previous slide of elements of a use policy. So these are ways that agencies don't include these elements in their use policy, which means that they have a document that they are calling their use policy, but by law is not a use policy. So one of them is, there's 2 around regulation. One is authorized use granting unlimited authorizations. That's usually, most commonly, it's something like only officers are allowed to use this, or only SWAT team members are allowed to use this. Or as long as a incident commander approves it, then use is authorized. So those are ways that authorized use is made meaningless. Another really common regulation issue is when tear gas and those less lethals don't comply with the AB 48 crowd control restrictions against that use. There's also not identifying an independent oversight body, missing assault rifles, and what I'm calling automatic restocking, where the police say, if we run out of something, then we're allowed to buy more without asking permission, because the law says explicitly, before acquiring any equipment, whether by purchase or any kind of acquisition, borrowing even, you have to get a permission from your governing body. And so this is one way to have this backdoor of being able to restock without telling anyone about it. And all of these are shortcomings that are present in San Francisco's policy. Let me go close that window so you don't hear that beeping. All right, hopefully that's a little bit better. So here's how to take action in San Francisco. At a very high level, right now, SFPD has a proposed policy that's not been approved, and the county sheriff does not even have a proposed policy. So right now is the time to be advocating for the county sheriff to make their policy, and also the time to be advocating for SFPD to have a better policy than what they have proposed. Next year, and going into next year, after the policy is approved by the Board of Supervisors, that's your chance to identify what changes you can advocate for next year. Plan to read the annual report that has to come out, and plan to advocate at next year's public hearing for what kind of changes you want to see in how San Francisco, both the police and the county sheriff, use their military gear. And because this is an annual process, you'll be able to keep doing this every single year. We have now is the time to set the baseline for how much we have to change the policy in the future. But every year is an opportunity for us to go back and ask for better out of our cities and counties. Specifically in San Francisco, right now, your SFPD policy, proposed policy, is being considered by the Public Safety Committee of the Board of Supervisors. And so that's probably the best place to get involved, is to show up at these meetings, to give public comment. That's usually about, I think, 1 or 2 minutes that you're allowed to give public comment, and ask for the changes that you want. It's the time to be reaching out to your supervisor, to the supervisors who sit on the Public Safety Committee, and talking with their staff, talking with them about what it is that you want out of these policies. Eventually, the policy will go to the full Board of Supervisors, and then that's more opportunities to speak up. There's 2 areas that I would encourage you to speak up in. One is to call for full compliance with the law. And so that means making sure that all of those uses are authorized, making sure that the authorizations are in full compliance with AB 48 crowd control restrictions, making sure that the assault rifles are going to be present, reminding them that the annual report is going to be due, and when should we expect to see that? So calling for full compliance is one way. The other way that I would encourage you to advocate for change is to call for better policies. So the LRAD, like, is there a way to push for that use policy to make it less likely to cause permanent hearing loss? Are there ways that you can get the assault rifles or Bearcats out of parades where they're normalized to children? Are there ways that you can advocate for people who are experiencing mental health crisis, so that way they don't experience over-militarization as a response to a mental health crisis? So that's it in terms of prepared material. I've got a couple of links, which I will drop into the chat later for more reading. Again, I'm a fellow in the California Healing Justice Program, which is based out of the Oakland office. I've got my email address up, which I'll also drop into the chat for if anyone has any questions.
Go ahead.
No.
Oh, well, I have a question. So how do we find out when these hearings are going to take place?
Yeah. So there's two ways. One is you could give me an email address and I can email you whenever I find out. The other is to go to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors Public Safety Committee website and watch for the agendas that get posted, and speak up that way.
Thank you.
I have a question. So how do you know the budgets of any local police stations around community policing versus the budget for military equipment?
I do not, I'm sorry.
I think that would be a good figure to like talk to. And do you know how, if there is training or how much training is done for people who are engaging with those who are mentally ill on responding to mentally ill people? Like if that's part of the training that they have?
Yeah, so I can't answer any of your questions directly, but I'm hoping I can give you some things to think about that will help. One is police show up with a gun. Maybe they leave the patrol rifle in their car, but they come with a handgun. They come with a threat of continued exposure with law enforcement and with the criminal legal system. And it can be with that amount of authority and power, it can be very hard for them to de-escalate a situation. They also come with very high price tags, right? Like there's a website called Transparent California, which I definitely encourage you to browse through. And it will show you what the salaries of your city employees, like San Francisco police, are, and you can compare them against other city employees to get a sense for like just how expensive it is to have a police respond instead of a social worker, for example. There's a couple of cities that have been pioneers in new programs that look at alternatives to police response. Eugene, Oregon has a program called Cahoots, which a lot of cities are starting to build models off of. In Denver, there's a program called STAR. And one thing that's really cool about STAR is they have made so many responses to community needs, and never once have they needed to ask police to come and back them up. So those are some programs that I would encourage you to take a look at, and to think about how budgeting for police, shifting the budget within the police, might not result in the outcome that you're looking for.
So I have a question. So could you call, or can I call the sheriff's office of any county and ask them how they're dealing with AB 481?
Yeah, you absolutely could. And I hope you will. There's no reason why anyone can't pick up the phone and call and ask for what's going on with anything. One of the provisions for AB 481 is that within the use policy, there needs to be it needs to be spelled out how complaints, questions, and I think comments are going to, about AB 481, are going to be handled by that agency. And it also needs to spell out exactly how the agency plans to make sure that a prompt response is going to be delivered.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah.
Yeah, we really appreciate it, Jennifer. I'm going to be following up with you to get that email notification. And are you going to paste these links in the chat?
I will, as soon as I can stop my share and pull them out.
Okay, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. So our next speaker is going to be Jim Lichty from the San Francisco Mennonite Church. We've been working on the Prop M, the empty homes tax, which is a proposal to tax developers of apartment buildings that have more than 3 apartments or more, if they choose to keep these apartments empty and off the market, holding out for, an unreasonable price. We have a lot of foreign investors in San Francisco that are buying property and constructing big apartment buildings just purely for the investment speculation for when they resell the property, and not necessarily putting those new apartments on the market. So we're proposing that we give them an incentive through a tax to put their new apartments on the market at a reasonable rate that people can afford. We're hoping that if more apartments are on the market, it'll bring the price down for everybody. Jim, are you ready to take
Yeah,
over?
yeah.
All right.
So I need to be sitting in your seat,
Yes.
right? Okay. Okay. Just getting used to this situation here. It's a privilege to be here and be able to talk to you for today. I guess I need to be looking at the screen, don't I? Sort of used to looking at people.
okay.
talking to.
And people can cope.
And people can cope, good. Yeah, I wanted to say, give a little background about, again, my name is Jim Lichty. I'm a member of First Mennonite Church of San Francisco. And I just would like to mention in background, one reason why I really appreciate being here is as a Mennonite for many decades, I feel like I've often looked to the Friends to help Mennonites guide their way, and it's kind of so progressive Mennonites. I feel have often been doing that with progressive. So it's kind of special for me to be able to talk to you here today. It's good to be here. And I want to say one thing that is important about this particular ballot measure for me personally, as someone who's lived in San Francisco since the 80s, is that, I want, and I guess this is true of all of you, I want this to be a city I can feel proud of. And feel like this is a city that has something to say to other cities and to the world. But I'm working specifically with Faith in Action Bay Area. And so do you. I've only been working with it since last spring, but I wanted to say a few things with you, a few things about Faith in Action Bay Area, just so that you understand why Faith in Action Bay Area took on this particular project. So as you probably already know, Faith in Action Bay Area is a group of over 100 faith communities. As far as I know, only a Jewish or Christian background so far, but and we work together kind of under the guidance of Pico, California, which is this larger community organizing group it's based in over 73 cities. And the idea, the basic concept is community organizing, leveraging the power of people to impact broader systematic change, but also working from the basis of faith. And that is one of our grounding, it's part of our grounding. And also that in our community organizing, we work very much on relationship-based organizing and building off of each other's stories. So when we go out, it's not just about persuasion. It's about building relationships with the community and listening to them and learning from them. So why did Faith in Action Bay Area decide to focus on this particular ballot measure? Well, it was because we are led specifically by those groups, by those congregations within Faith in Action who are most directly targeted. So in Faith in Action, the congregations that take the lead are the lower income and in general Spanish-speaking congregations. So a lot of the work is done coordination between a larger group of usually more privileged English-speaking congregations and the Spanish-speaking congregations. And it was their decision. It was through their leadership. It was their specific, they decided that this was their priority. This was the measure that they really felt would have the strongest impact on their community, which was seeing a lot of their members being, especially senior members, being forced to move out of their housing, which was seeing some of their members being unable to purchase their medication. because they had to go for rent. So a lot of the focus became on rent, the situation of the elderly in San Francisco, and the fact that even in my own Mennonite congregation, we've had a number of families leave the Bay Area. And these are not poor families. These are people just who are deciding they need a cheaper place to live. So it's working off of that leadership, and they chose the empty homes tax last spring already as a priority. So we were deeply involved in collecting signatures to get this on the ballot, working very closely also with Democratic Socialists of America. A lot of the measure was put together based in Dean Preston's office. So one of our supervisors, one of our more progressive supervisors. And the basic idea is to, address some specific problems. So what I just mentioned, that people are having trouble paying the rent or being driven out of the city, but also that the profit incentive has guided housing construction in the city, which means that low-income housing is being avoided because it offers us profit to builders. And so they are building overwhelmingly. We're actually way ahead on the proportion of our commitment to market rate housing. We're way behind on the city's own commitment to low-income housing. And maybe then, not surprisingly, that means that there are tens of thousands of empty units in the city. We were working with a measure of 50,000. A more recent census measure puts it at over 50,000. I forget honestly whether it's 53 or 58,000 empty units. Over 10% of available housing in the city's empty. And most of these units are focused in those parts of the city where there's been the most construction of market rate housing. And they're also mostly in multi-unit buildings, large apartment buildings. So you're kind of seeing, just from looking at the profile of where the empty houses are, what part of the problem is that the builders have this incentive to build, and there's also some incentive just to keep it empty, that it's simpler, that it's still profitable. So what ballot measure M would do would provide an incentive to fill those units by taxing vacant units. It would not tax all vacant units. It would tax only units in buildings with 3 or more empty. The building itself has to have at least 3 units to be susceptible to the tax. The units have to be empty for at least 6 months. There's a number of other exemptions. So there's a real attempt not to just punish someone for having an empty unit for very good reasons. For example, if the owner dies, if the owner is suddenly found and needs to be in full care, so it's really been thought through to try to target those who are profiting from these units being empty. And this has also been done in Vancouver. I find that the rate in San Francisco is actually pretty mild compared to Vancouver's. So this would only say a unit that is 1,000 feet or less, that's been empty for that amount, will be billed $2,500 the first year. For the entire first year, $2,500.
The tax.
The tax. If it stays empty for a second year, and again, so it has to be empty for 6 or more months during the year. Then on the second year, if it's not filled, that would double. And then on the third year, it would double once again. And that's where it would be capped.
What do you mean by 1,000 square feet or less?
So the smaller apartments, 1,000 feet or less, would be charged $2,500. If you go from 1,000 to 2,000 square feet, it jumps up another level, and over 3,000 square feet, it's even more.
Okay,
So it's
that's the tax.
yeah, that would be the tax. So the tax is adjusted to the size of the apartment. And the money raised also, I think this is really important. The money does not just go to the city. The money is deposited into a specific separate fund that can be used only for two purposes. Well, one purpose is administration of the money. But the key purpose is it will go for subsidies, housing subsidies, specifically for those over 66 years of age or older in the city, and for low income. That's 50%. The other 50% isn't interesting how they have it. It's basically to increase low income housing, but that would be through purchasing already built structures and converting them to low income housing. So it wouldn't actually fund new buildings. And I don't know if they're thinking, but I have in my mind some of these units that were constructed for market rate may sell and be converted then to public housing. I don't know if that's, or other buildings that are available. So it's actually working with structures that are already built. Finally, just a question, does this work? Well, as I mentioned, it's been done in Vancouver, British Columbia. Within the first 3 years, the amount of empty units reduced by 26%. And it raised tens of millions of dollars. So at a minimum, this would provide some, this does not solve the problem, but it would redistribute income. I've seen different estimates, but one estimate is it could raise as much as $38 million a year.
And who administers the subsidies? Would it be the same agency or would it be like Department of Housing?
So that's a good question. I don't know if I know that specific answer. I was looking at the law itself, and it did say that of course, the measure itself would fund the administration. I'm not sure it specifies that code. So I really, the other thing that would be really exciting if this passed is it could become a blueprint for other major cities, because the number of empty units in New York, for example, is similar to this. So this could become a model. This could be a way for San Francisco to kind of become closer to the kind of city we all want San Francisco to be. So I'll also say I'm happy to put my email. I have other links or materials I can get to you. I'm happy to take people's email addresses and I can send them to you, or I can put my email in the chat for people. But otherwise, that's my presentation.
Yay.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Good, you're welcome. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
We might get this passed, and it would be a big deal.
Yeah.
It would be a big deal.
I think we have a question.
Oh, yeah.
I just have a comment, but it sounds like the money that would be taxed could be used very immediately, like by going into a subsidy for someone, that's an immediate solution to having a place to live. And then the other thing where it wouldn't go into new construction, it would go into
Right.
buying a building, well, that's also very immediate. So
Yeah.
I think those seem like really smart ways to spend the money.
Yeah. Also, since I'm also concerned about climate change, housing construction is one of the most fossil fuel heavy forms activities in our economy. So the idea of buying already built structures is exciting to me for various reasons.
Especially if there's already enough housing.
There appears to be,
It's just,
there appears to be tens of thousands of empty units.
So it's not for single family.
Absolutely not. No, they would not be targeted. It would have, it's only units with a minimum of 3 units would be targeted.
Yeah, let me clarify, you could own 4 single-family homes and live in one and rent the other 3 out.
And
You're
you
not
wouldn't
gonna
be touched.
subject to this,
You
because
wouldn't be touched.
most homeowners are motivated to offer a price that is competitive.
But the empty units are overwhelmingly, over 75% are in multi-unit dwellings anyway. So the concentration of empty units is in these multi-unit.
And the Chronicles this morning had this huge front page article about how these companies, these 12 major companies, in California, state investment trust, buying up all these homes, operating.
And one of those, I don't know, it was one of those mentioned, but one of those was owned the home where the moms for housing
Yeah,
folks were driven out of,
Yeah.
that was mentioned in the previous presentation. And they're based in LA.
Yeah.
They're not local. They're not, they don't care about local situation. I mean, they're not connected to it.
yeah.
And they're buying up nursing homes too. The
Well,
same thing happened in 2008 when everything collapsed. A lot of corporations swept in and bought houses for cash that they later put on the market as rentals.
Some people aren't renting them. They're just waiting for the price to go up.
Right.
I
Well-
guess that's what they're waiting for.
It's, and in the meantime, they can write off the loss of
Of that rent.
that income that they're not getting. So there's no consequence.
you know how it affects nonprofit developers, like agencies that are, that have. owned
They're
SROs.
exempt.
Oh, they are.
any nonprofit owner is exempt. Any form of low-income housing is also exempt.
Okay. I guess you're taking from the same people.
Yeah, and I don't know the statistics there, but those are 2 specific exemptions, 2 of the exemptions. So this would only be for profit-based owners.
Interesting.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank
for
you, I really
having
appreciate
me.
it. I guess there's no more questions. Diane, did you have a question or?
Okay, and I
thank you
have
for
my, I put
attending.
my email in the chat, so.
Okay, yeah, all right, I'm gonna copy that for my own purposes. I mean, keep it in touch. but
Okay, yeah.
I want to stay in touch.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you all.
All right, I guess
Thank
we'll
you.
leave now.
I
Stop the
guess that's what
recording.
you do when it's over.
No, I really appreciate that. I learned a little bit myself there.
And Carol,